Hello everyone, it is I, your fellow metalhead here, Andrew Gabriel, and before I get into today's subject, I'll just want to thank everyone for the positive and negative reaction to my Zoom with J-Dog. I know I used the word like a lot as a filler word, but it was mainly because I was nervous, and the fact that it was my first time talking for basically 2 hours with the man, but I'm glad I had that experience, and I'm glad I have 100 subscribers now, which means there will be a very special episode of Into the Underground coming up, hopefully on Monday or Tuesday, but it'll be a very, very spicy and entertaining watch. I will bet that. But the thing I want to get into today is this. Is there particularly a metal band that you got into and really loved when you were younger, but over the years you grew out of them? And the reason why I say that, or ask that specifically, is because there have been bands like that for me, but there's one in mind that I've been thinking about a lot recently. There's still 2 albums by them I really, really enjoy, and then other than that, it's not that the other stuff sucks, it's that it's just not my particular, not cup of tea, but to me, it's just, I wouldn't go out of my way to listen to it. And I'm explicitly ignoring bands that I grew up on, or at least liked in my younger youth, like Limp Bizkit, Slipknot, Korn, you know, new metal stuff, which I still like some of it. I'm not a huge fan of Seven Dust, but I think their first 2 albums are really, really good for what they are. And I'm a big Deftones fan, even if a lot of people do not consider them new metal. They're more like, and myself, I would consider them more alternative metal mixed with post-hardcore, but it's still, they got lumped in with new metal because they were touring with bands of the time then, and they just, that label was thrown at them. But I think the band that was coming to mind for me was Incantation, and that will come as a surprise to some of you, because if any of you have known me for quite a while, my favorite band growing up, or at least my favorite death metal band growing up, from my late high school years to probably around last year or so, that was my favorite death metal band of all time. And I still really, really like them. I still have a lot of respect. And albums like Onward to Golgotha, Diabolical Conquest, especially Diabolical Conquest, that album's fucking amazing. Albums like that, I still hold them in very high regard. It's just that I've come to prefer many, many other bands, especially within death metal. And the main point I would like to speak out is, with Incantation, is that not a lot of, like, they don't change their sound a lot. And even when they do, it's usually stuff like Diabolical Conquest, where it's like, again, I'm using the word like as a filler word, whatever, but with Diabolical Conquest, there's more of a black metal influence, as you could hear, mainly from Profanatica, which makes sense because Paul Lenny was an original member of Incantation. Oh god, sorry, my nose itches. But with that, you kind of get Mortal Throne of Nazarene over and over again afterwards, almost, because it's like, there's, every album has to end in like a slow doomy song, and to me that almost kills the variety for me. Whereas a lot of the bands in their scene, like Immolation, Leveling Creation, even Revenant and Ripping Corpse, there's a lot more variety as opposed to a certain album being played out in a certain way. Because each Incantation album, when Incantation releases a new album, it's always going to be the opening track is like a fast ripping song, and then the ending track is this slow, doomy, almost drony kind of sound. And then it's basically, when it's time to record another album, they basically just do the same thing over again. And that's not a bad thing. Some bands have done that, and Some bands have done that and it has worked for them. However, in their case, I would argue they're more putting a twist on newer styles that they played with. Not necessarily a death metal band, but Sodom does that. I don't like every album by them, but their albums, I would say their discography is overall good in my opinion. But at the same time, some people will say that Sodom releases the same album over and over again, but I don't necessarily agree. Because, do you really think Get What You Deserve sounds like Obsessed by Cruelty? Do you really think that Obsessed by Cruelty sounds like M16? M16 sounds like Till Death To Us Part. No. Because to me, there's 3 hours of Sodom's career, or rather I would say 4. The first one being the first wave super primitive black metal stuff, first wave black metal stuff, which isn't my favorite, but I still enjoy it. Then there's the thrash metal stuff, which is Persecution Mania, Agent Orange, Tapping the Vein, etc., which is my favorite stuff by them. If I'm going to listen to Sodom, it's going to be those albums. Then there's the crossover era, which I like it a little less than the first wave black metal era, but still, Get What You Deserve. That's a fucking amazing album. I don't care what people say about Jabba the Hutt. As goofy as that song is, it's at least catchy and it's fun. However, with that, then you get to the new, redefined thrash era Sodom, which it's down-tuned a bit more, probably to D, whereas the earlier records was in standard, E standard. And then there's so many more melodic parts. There's a lot more variation between tempos. Even if there's a 1 hour long Sodom album, which was basically Genesis X, Genesis XIX, or whatever that album's called. That album was an hour long, but I still loved it. And it's probably my favorite newer Sodom album. Probably my favorite Sodom album post M16. And M16 was a fucking amazing one. Another band that I would say fits into that category is Protector. Protector don't have as many eras as Sodom does, but they do change it up a little bit. They do put new twists on their sound every time they release a new album. You have Misanthropia, which is my favorite release by them, and it's basically first wave black metal, sort of like Sodom in a way. Then you get the the Mad stuff, which I think it goes on for one album, but the Mad and Golem, which is a bit more straightforward than, I wouldn't say straightforward, but a bit more by the numbers, I would say. Actually, I wouldn't say that for the Mad, I would say that for Golem. So Golem and Misanthropia, that's what I meant to say. Golem and Misanthropia, but the Mad, it was one album where they got a little more detailed with the riffing, but they continued more in that first wave black metal sound. Then you have Shedding of the Skin and The Heritage, which The Heritage is probably my favorite full length by them. The Shedding of Skin is probably my second favorite full length, but I've already said that my favorite release overall is the Misanthropia EP. But those albums are awesome. There's a lot of, there's... Shedding of Skin is what I would call a bit more straightforward and by the numbers, but the songs are just ripping fast and in your face. Whereas The Heritage, it takes that sound from the Shedding of Skin and adds a bit more variety to it. Where there's songs like Lost Properties and Convicts on the Streets. Those songs are awesome to me. Convicts on the Streets, I should say. Again, I'm stumbling over my words. But with that song, it almost sounds like if Stooges wrote like a death thrash song. And that, to me, perfectly describes why it's so awesome. Then you have Lost Properties, which there's so many changes in tempo, just fuckery in there, that it's hard not to love that song. Then after all that, you get the reunion material, and therefore I do like it. It's just not my favorite as much as the Sodom stuff, or even the early Protector stuff. But again, they're at least doing stuff that I would say is different, or at least they're throwing in little new things to not distract from their audience, but they're also keeping it fresh at the same time. But for death metal, I would say bands who do that are Immolation, Malevolent Creation, Ripping Corpse have only one album, but same with Reverend, so I guess I'll mention their band. What else is there? I'll mention stuff out of the scene. Out of the New York scene, at least. There's Death. I don't like every Death album, but every album at least has something to offer. Because after Human, it went a bit more into a melodic prog side. And I still like that stuff. Like, Individual Thought Patterns, to me, is more listenable than the latest Incantation, which I do own. I listened to it. Last time, it kind of didn't really stick with me. But Individual Thought Patterns, as much as that album isn't my favorite, I don't think it sucks. I think it's a good album. It's just that I prefer so many others. It's the last Death album I go to if I am in the mood for Death. And even Son of Perseverance, like, people like the shit on that album. But to me, it's good. I think the Painkiller cover is a bit overkill, but overall, I think it's a very solid and very great album, even if the songs need trimming or whatever, and even if the Painkiller cover kind of sucks. But to me, it's at least better than what even Morbid Angel, even if they like made a Marilyn Manson album or whatever, Rob Zombie shit. But again, at least they're trying something new, even if it is commercial. Carcass, they wimped it up after Necrosis, arguably after Symphonies, in my opinion. But they're at least trying new stuff. But Incantation, no disrespect to them, but they don't try anything new after a certain point, which, to me, they kind of fell off after Blasphemy, but Diabolical Conquest is really my cutoff, and that album's fantastic. That's my favorite album by them. Because it's like, when you hear that ending track, I think it's called Upon Majestic Ruin. No, it's not that. It's Majesty of Infernal Damnation. That's what the second part of the song title is called. And you can't top that closer in terms of Incantation closers. Because at first I was like, maybe Abolishment of Immaculate Serenity is the best one. And to me, it hasn't aged well. It's a good vibe, but at the same time, it's not really musically interesting to me. It's the same pace, and there are good riffs in there. It's just that I don't want just a linear tempo when it comes to Incantation. The good thing with Incantation is this. My favorite part, at least. There are parts that are really fast, and there are parts that are really slow. When you mix the two, it's much better than, say, again, Abolishment of Immaculate Serenity, or any of those songs that are just more doom than death metal, which I know Death Doom exists, but sometimes there's very little going on in those more death doomy songs. But I will say, sorry, I thought I was going to sneeze, but I will say this. There are certainly worse bands you could do than Incantation in terms of lack of a variety or anything. Like, I think Skinless kind of blows. Mortician's probably one of the worst bands I ever heard. I liked them more when I was a kid, but to me, their appeal is a novelty. And I only really I like less Internal Bleeding albums than I do Incantation albums. So it's not that Incantation is the worst out of the New York bands. It's just that, to me, their overall consistency is a bit, I'm not so sure what the word is, but it's a bit overthrowing it. I guess that's what it is. But people like to think that they're very consistent, but they do very little with that consistency. And you don't have to be these bands, these prog metal bands that every album sounds completely different after each and every one. But just, if you're gonna play your style, just don't be an Incantation. Don't be another one of these bands that just plays out their albums the same way as every other one. And that to me is just why they kind of grew off me. But let me just take a sip of my soda. But yeah, there's I guess another one that grew off me was, again, Mortician. Sorry, I gotta clear up my throat. But Mortician's basically just... I get that some people just want stupid music that's basically you don't have to engage much with it to think about. That's kind of why I don't like them. The riffs are very simple, but they're also just not engaging in any way. I hate that polka beat style they do on some songs, you know, that booga 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 booga, and then the riffs just go like bum 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 jun 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 jun, and it's the stupidest thing ever. And God forbid when they do the grind parts, it's almost like listening to a ice blender blend ice or whatever. It's almost like I don't even know. It's so fucking stupid. Another band that grew off me, Skinless. I loved them as a kid, which again is another band I mentioned earlier. But with Skinless, it's just I'm not too in the brutal death metal anymore, at least. But I do like some brutal death metal. Probably more that goes into like more old school territory, if anything. Suffocation, Cryptopsy, Severe Torture. I like the first two I like the first two Gorgasm albums, which I consider Stab Wound Intercourse, even if it's an EP, their first album. And then Blink Profusely is the best to me. But with Skinless, they almost border on basically Wigger Slam, and my god, I do not like Wigger Slam. I especially do not like Slam in general. But those, oh god, don't play Skinless around me. But again, with Incantation, they're at least better than those bands, but at the same time, I'm just not into the way that they play out their discography, and I still love them. They just don't crack a top 30 death metal band for me. So that's really all I have to say, for now. But this is Andrew Gabriel signing off, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay metal.